Recording. All right, it is December 3rd. We normally would have had our meeting last week, but last week was the Thanksgiving meeting. And then while we are still waiting for others to come in, I'm just going to go and kill some time and then just kind of talk at you guys for a little bit, and then you can go ahead and interrupt me at any time, please. And I'm going to go and talk about a little bit of some updates that has happened in the community for a little bit. So we've had some, let's see, what did we do since the last release? Since the last release, we've been doing a lot of work with ECR recently, having visibility on container images. And we've gotten some new contributions from, I think it's Louis Gomez, and he's added some help for us with GCP. We had some issues with Travis CI, and this one was pretty helpful where on GCP, we had another contributor who helped filter down the projects that are consumed by our GCP sync by filtering it down to only the active ones. Since GCP doesn't do, it like keeps things in like a deleted state, and then we can kind of sync those things, and then it can make your sync really slow. Marco added in GCP DNS ingestion, lots of good stuff. But I think that the main a big reason why a lot of people have started to discover cartography. I'm gonna plug this post right here just because we can. Shame that Andrew's not here, but then we've had a blog post, I am whatever you say I am. This was last month, talking about all of the resource permission relationships that he figured out, basically calculating resulting accesses and resulting policies in AWS. So pretty happy to see that go out and then see the subsequent contributions to the community. I think that, like I said, there's not too many people in the meeting today because we've kind of, this is an out of band meeting after the holidays, and then I expect things to pick up maybe about in January or so, since the next one that's scheduled is around Christmas, and yeah, we'll figure it out. Anyway, that's kind of where that's basically the news. I'm gonna stop talking, kind of open up the floor, and then let other people talk too. Oh, cool. Andrew's here. Let's bring him in.
Yeah, I was just pinging him and said they're talking about you. Andrew and I work together, so I was just in a meeting with him.
Yeah, your ears are ringing a bit, Andrew.
Hello.
We were just talking about your awesome work with like the RPRs.
Yep. There's some good stuff in there.
Yeah.
It also triggered some interesting posts and reach out from Jupyter-1 as well. So for those who don't know, Jupyter-1 is a similar approach, more like and commercial approach. So I've been keeping an eye on what they're doing. They were pretty impressed with permission mapping. They also reach out to me. They potentially want to do some contributions. I don't know what that looks like. I do have a meeting set up with them, I believe, not tomorrow, next Friday, the Friday after, just to see if they want to contribute and so on. So I think that blog post kind of like brought a lot of visibility back to the team as well. I think it's also very well timed with some of the things that we're doing, Andrew and I, on Amazon side as well, where we are, I think, scaling out pieces of cartography to how many accounts we're ingesting, Andrew? Like 20 around 20,000 right now.
What?
Yeah.
Altogether, we're up to like 138,000, but we don't go all that deep on all of them. So okay. 60,000 that we go deep on.
Yeah. So we will make contribution back. We're not using cartography stock, so we're doing kind of back-end data ingesting because like somebody else is calling the API for us. So we got lucky there. Somebody was already doing this. Similar, I think, Sika, you were mentioning that around having the ability to load from CSV, raw CSV. Is that correct? I forgot who was asking for that.
I think that was Ming a couple months ago.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're definitely taking similar approach, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
concept
basically.
is definitely working on large scale as well. It just requires a little bit different ingestion process.
Right. On that note, actually, I think that I ran this idea by Andrew a little bit on a Friday night coding session, and had this idea talking about increasing the number of retries that we have in the sync. So a little bit of background. Right now, with the way the sync runs is that everything runs very linearly, and we expect everything to, because there's all sorts of data dependencies. So as a concrete example, we will first load. If you want to calculate who has permissions on a given S3 bucket, you need to get first the IAM principal, then you get the bucket, and then you get the relationship between those two entities. And then so there's a data dependency there. If one of those steps fails, then you cannot accurately calculate those permission relationships. And so this is a problem if you're expecting your entire graph to be correct just after one pass of that data. And so if you're a red teamer and then you want to just run everything like that after one go, and then if there's a failure, that's not really gonna help you. But if you're like us, where you are running cartography kind of as a service, then this is less of a problem because you can retry. The ordering is less of a problem because you can just frequently retry these things, and then eventually it's going to be correct. So for example, if you were to get, let's do an ordering that doesn't make sense. You get the relationships first, then the buckets, and then the users. Well, you'll just have a bunch of user buckets that aren't connected. But then on the next pass, if you retry that with those data in the graph already, you do relationships then at that point, you get those connections there, albeit on, slightly stale data from last sync. Though the problem, what I would say though, is that this is not really that much of a problem, because when you're running all of these steps to begin with, from step 1 all the way to step 3, it's potentially taking hours anyway, and your infrastructure almost certainly has already changed. So there's no reason to necessarily be precious about like having some arbitrary idea of correctness. So anyway, my point in saying this is that I want to head in the direction where we are setting up people who are running cartography as a service to run these retries more frequently, so that you gain a whole lot more flexibility in how these syncs are run. So you can like have a scheduler, you can run things in parallel. And yeah, that's I've posted these thoughts in chat, and I think that I was planning to make a one-pager on it, but then it's just haven't had the time to do that. And I think that you lose some, I guess, precious notion of accuracy for a whole lot of flexibility, and I think that trade-off is absolutely worth it.
Are you saying about retrying complete blocks or all data ingestion retry as a kind of, I think I suggested before having a function called invoke operation with retry to make it generic, and then you pass a delegate there, right? So that the retry becomes agnostic. Is that what you're referring to, or you're referring?
It's slightly different. I'm referring to in terms like the overall idea, what you described there. That's what I'm talking about. I think that there's some differences in terms of what unit are we retrying. Like, are we retrying the entire AWS sync, or are we retrying a sub part of that AWS sync? I am suggesting the second option, where we are retrying like little sub components. So specifically those sync functions. The reason why we can't retry sync functions right now is because their signatures all have different parameters. So if we make them all uniform, then all of a sudden these functions become schedulable, they become more generic and all that good stuff.
I think we're talking about the same. Is my suggestion was to retry every operation that we depend on, right? So for example, every single operation we call into AWS, GCP, Okta, any of those operations has a retry mechanism, because assume transient failures.
Yeah.
So, and then you implement this in a consistent way, and then you can have some bells and whistles that allows the Intel modules itself to control the retry mechanism depending on GCP may have a different retry policy than AWS and so on. So you're allowed to bleed this into the retry logic from the specific Intel module.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a quick question, just kind of maybe slightly off topic. Like, have we looked into using things like Airflow or other big data platforms so we can use like view our sinks in a more graphical way and like retry individual things and view failures graphically? Has that been like a conversation before?
Yeah, it's been part of the conversation. I think that the things that have been stopping us mostly is just time. Yeah. But I think even before we get to Airflow, though, this work, I have a PR out where it's in progress, where we need to make all of our sync functions just have the same signature so that they all are expected, because like they all have very different types of parameters. The reason why I'm saying that is because right now our current unit for a given DAG is a start function, which is like all of AWS or all of GCP, and then that's not enough granularity in any scenario.
Right.
If we're going to go down that model, why don't we potentially look at decoupling ingestion from data grabbing from ingestion a little bit? Andrew, I'm referring to how you set it up for us, right? So one is the way we have it is agnostic to backend database. The second is you don't need to learn any Cypher, as far as I know, in the way we're ingesting. So it's just a bunch of CSV files.
Yeah, it's the same thing that Storm Spotter does. There's sort of two rounds: gather the data and store it, and then take that data and pump it into the graph. That way we can contribute to the second part, since we already have the first part done.
Yep.
But yeah, I think in general, decoupling Neo4j, obviously it's still our back end, but decoupling that from inside the sync jobs, as I'm sure has already been discussed in this meeting, Neo4j 4 kills a whole bunch of the cipher that's already written in the sync jobs. And so any way that we can get away from that, even if it's come up with a new mechanism for new sync jobs and not spend all of the cost of redoing the old ones, it still lets us contribute back to that.
Have you completed that decoupling? I remember that in the Slack you said that it was it's a good idea, but it's a massive rewrite.
Well,
how far along are you on that?
We have the piece, we have the second piece, raw data to graph. And that works pretty well. What we don't have is the first piece, because we don't have to write it. But that's the first piece that would be expensive. Going in there and modifying all of the Neo4j run statements to output into some type of raw data system instead. That seems to be where all of the cost is going to be.
Yeah, so it's like one problem at a time. The way that I would kind of prioritize things is that let's first get the sync functions all uniform so that they can be scheduled, and then this unlocks like so many other different potential things. You can make it in a DAG, you can make them be schedulable, you can make them be retryable, make them be flexible from needing to run in like this very linear thing. Next, let's decouple data ingestion away from the get functions. Get and then the load. Yeah, let them be separate.
I agree. I think that makes total sense.
Yeah, I'm excited about like the next couple steps. I think that thinking in this way, not necessarily being, allowing more flexibility. I think that's a really powerful idea.
Maybe we can, Andrew. Maybe we can convince Amazon to release CloudSeer. That would be pretty significant. I don't know how they do it in the backend. Do they call API in the backend, or they don't tap into the backend data source, right? They actually call the APIs.
They call the APIs, which is actually not what I wish they would do, but that would be the best open source method. So at Amazon, it is possible to hide. You can block access from CloudSeer. You're able to see your account, and then you can hide from security, essentially. Whereas if it used backend data sources, you can't hide from us. But yes, we absolutely should open source CloudSeer.
Yeah, when are you guys going to start contributing back?
We are trying.
Yeah, I think we have to, this is Q4 December, so we have to finish the goals. I will tackle the open source early next year so that we can contribute back. CloudSeer is not owned by us. CloudSeer is effectively the calling all the APIs and storing in raw format, right? In kind of a structured format. So that's all it does. It doesn't do any analysis whatsoever. So they basically build all this data set and share it back to internally, which is super useful for us. So I don't know about CloudSeer, but I would like to make the contribution back to scaling cartography at the scale that we're running, because we cannot use stock cartography at this point.
Gotcha. Yeah, looking forward to it. I think that yeah, we're us at Lyft, we're tied up in end of year commitments also. It's a very interesting time. I think that Roshni was mentioning earlier that it's coming up time on midterms also. So, but
yeah, it's right about like final exam season. I actually had a question. So on you mentioned like making the function signatures such that the parameters are like consistent on the sync function. What would that look like? Would that be like adding schemas? Because I know right now like they're all like individual like fields that the sync function is taking in, but would that be like adding some sort of like input schema?
Yeah, it's probably one of the bigger refactors that we've done so far. I'll link the PR in the document right now, actually. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just this 467.
Right, that would be helpful because actually I wanted to bring up something similar to the IAM permissions preview feature that we were like potentially discussing last time. And for a little bit of background for people who are hearing this for the first time, it's kind of the idea that Cartography lets you handle permissions that are already in AWS or already in cloud provider services. But if we wanted to test like adding a new set of permissions without actually adding it to AWS, we would want some way to be able to simulate that in the graph that Cartography has. And that allows us to do all sorts of computations on the new features or the new permissions that we're adding and being able to see how, or like the effect that those new permissions have. And I was thinking about this a little bit more, and it would be very useful if there was some sort of way that we could expose like an API to be able to like load data into the Neo4j graph from like Cartography, because I know that the sync functions already do that. And if we could take in like a input rule or like an input like IAM policy or something like that and just be able to load it as like a schema element and be able to load that into the graph instead of having to write a Cypher query to like manually add it, that would be useful in simulating some sort of test permissions in the graph.
Andrew's smiling.
I really like the idea.
Great.
I don't know where it necessarily fits to be built. But yeah, absolutely, we should be able to modify the graph and label that modification as hypothetical, as in not really true, and then let all of the other analysis run and drift detection pick up what the drift is by adding this feature or this permission that is not actually there yet. We can, so if you get it into the graph will compute it. So you can compute the permissions before, you can compute the permissions after, and determine what the delta is, especially in the ways you care about. Now, this many more people got access to this bucket as a result of this change. I'm just not sure where it lives as a service, but I do think there's huge value in being able to do that.
Right, that is true. And actually, I think, so Alex and I have like a small doc on this that I've been trying to work on, but again, like end of the year, so many things happening. But there, like one of the things that we discussed is we would be able to like dump like a copy of the graph or like a backup, and then be able to add stuff to that. So then we're not actually modifying the actual graph that's maybe being like hosted in like a production environment. So we would just be modifying like a local copy of the graph to like mess around with. And this was also could be useful to I actually wanted to see if there were any updates on this, but I think Alex mentioned something about computing like a risk score based on different questions that we might want to ask about the graph. And I was just wondering if there were any like updates on that feature.
Yeah, nothing on that part yet, but in this stuff, that's definitely planned coming from Lyft side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
If you want to, yeah, please do share maybe a link to the spec that you have started into the minutes. Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat right now, or I can put it in the meeting minutes. That'll be helpful. Although it is slightly under construction.
I think that the idea of decoupling data ingestion away from the get functions, having like basically a JSON dump that you can play with, and then just load that in there, making a what if machine off of that. I'm not saying that you should be blocked on us doing that, because I have no idea when we're going to be able to do that particular feature. I see that more as kind of a little bit more longer term, medium to longer term, definitely not immediate, but that's something that would make your feature a lot more easier to build.
Right. That is true. Especially, I noticed that because in the documentation for cartography, there's schema elements that are already specified for each like cloud provider service, but those aren't like actually implemented like anywhere in the code, other than just like arbitrary fields that are kind of like floating as inputs.
Yeah, exactly. Like it would be really nice if the schema was something that was something enforced by code, but
Oh, is that something that's like maybe being like planned on being done? Because that would make a lot of like things easier. And I don't know if you guys are like looking into implementation and stuff on that, but I know that like using Marshmallow for like schema would potentially be very useful. But yeah.
I'm not familiar, but I'm a fan.
Cool. I can probably, okay, for some reason I can't like type on this. Okay, I can type, but I can't post the link. Oh, never mind. It's there. Okay, that's the link to the kind of one pager that I have on it, or multi-pager, but I can also post a link to Marshmallow. But Marshmallow basically just lets you like define a schema, kind of like how we have it defined in the cartography like README for the schema, and you would just be able to like validate input fields and like specify different types, stuff like that. So if there was going to be like a major refactor on defining a bunch of schemas for all the stuff that's in the docs, that would be a good place to start, maybe.
Yeah, and like with every refactor, I think that if we were to go this way, I think what we could do is kind of do it phased, where newer stuff is going to start off with the new schema, and then later on we will phase it into the older stuff.
Okay, that makes sense.
I like the idea though.
It is really good thinking. Are you doing that as a school project, or what prompted you to come up with the idea?
Oh, I was working on like a related thing on my internship project this past summer, and now I'm just doing it because it's interesting. But yeah.
We had some needs for that, so that's why we're somewhat curious around where's the source of it. Are you in school until the end of the year?
Yeah, I'll be in school. I'm graduating next May, and then I've actually accepted a full-time offer at the Climate Corporation, which is where I interned last summer. So I'll be in Seattle next year, which is cool.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Although we had like very similar use cases to what cartography was handling, and that's what I was using cartography for, is to basically build an API on top of that to handle some more custom use cases that we had. And this would have been like one of the useful features, that like having a what if machine, that because the real value that this is like providing is when not everyone like maybe knows how to write IAM permissions, and if someone wants to write IAM permissions and be able to test the effect that they have, like even if you know how to write them, you might not be able to see like the full impact that a permission has. And again, this relates to the risk score stuff that wanted to be calculated, being able to see how risky adding these new set of permissions would be. That would make approving new permissions or being able to check that someone has like actually given themselves like the permissions that they really need and not over permissioning themselves or like under permissioning themselves. That is very useful to have like an interface for that.
I think one of the scenario that comes to mind is during code change, the IAM permission that you're about to change, does it actually change your expectation overall, right? Or you're introducing new issues and so on. Look into some work has been done on that from automated reasoning with Valkovia engine. Just as an FYI, there's I'll post it later on the Slack channel. I have to run to another meeting, but there's been some good work on that. We're also very interested in sort of a very nearby. It's actually peers of us. We brought in some folks from automated reasoning specifically to look at this type of problem space. We want to have mathematical proof that we are securing our payment infrastructure. So understanding, okay, is a change about to impact the overall risk calculation? We're investing quite a bit there already. So that
would be cool if you could link to that in the Slack channel or like on the meeting minutes.
Sorry, I have to run, but
that's okay.
Thanks.
Bye. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is your first time talking to Roshni, right, Andrew?
I think so.
It is.
Yeah,
somehow these fell off my calendar.
Well, I'm so glad that you guys are able to talk. I think that this is a good complement for Andrew's work with the IAM permission.
Resource permission relationship mapping, right? Yeah, that was actually something that would have been extremely useful in my internship project, but I only found it in the docs about like at the end of my internship, and then I realized how useful it would have been. But I think actually I might have brought this up, but one of the things that I noticed that would have made like resource permission relationships mapping like a little bit more useful, although like harder to implement in the current state of things, is having like blob characters match more than just like the star character itself. But I guess that's kind of harder to do within the graph. Like you would have to do regular expression matching or something like that. But the idea that like if you wanted to, because I know that right now, if you wanted to do like reading a S3 bucket, you would do S3 :get star, but then there could also be like S3 get object star that shows up in permissions, and you would have to like manually cover all of those bases.
It should cover any get object operation. And so you can map any relationship you want based on the permissions. It doesn't go any deeper than the bucket, but it should be able to figure out that S3 star does include S3 get object. But yeah, we don't. There are several updates needed. Some of them are a little bit more tough to handle. It doesn't take conditions into account. It doesn't take resource permissions into account. And it doesn't go any deeper than the bucket. So if you're got a specific blob in the bucket that you're trying to protect, then we won't create the relationship. But it should be able to the bucket from IAM permissions. It should be able to map it all correctly.
Cool. I actually want to clarify one thing on that. So if you wrote like in the YAML file that you're specifying it in, if you wrote S3 :get star, that would also match actions that fall under like S3 get object. And
you would, we abstract a lot of them away because for S3 get object, put object, pretty obvious. That's the way you access data in S3. In places like Dynamo, it's not so clear. you can query, you can scan, you can get object. So if it matches any of those, then you could put it in there. So if you wanted to have one that did any S3 action, then you would have to list out all the S3 actions in the resource permission relationship, but then it would create a relationship for any policy that, or any principal that can do any of those actions against S3. So that's why we allowed it to group them, some of them together, because it's effectively the same thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. That also is like another reason why adding like this sort of what if machine would be useful, because I think right now you can only run permission relationships mapping like when you do the sync, but it would be useful to be able to run that like even if stuff was like added to the graph like manually, and then you wanted to run the mapping after that. That would be useful.
Which I think falls into the DAG work. If you have a DAG of all of these together, you should be able to specify a specific sync that you want to run, and then it can figure out from the DAG what all upstream syncs need to possibly run, or just allow people to specify just the sync job that you want to go.
Tying on to that with the backup idea, I think if you have DAGs in place and proper schemas and all that, then you can also use an event sourcing model that makes everything more efficient, and you kind of effectively get those backups that you wanted, I think, too. Yeah.
Can you actually go into the event sourcing model in a little bit more detail?
Just like instead of downloading everything all at, well, I guess this is somewhat unrelated, but like instead of downloading everything all new, every sync, you just take snapshots at the end of every day, and then you would effectively try to compute the change, and then just update the graph with the changes. So it's ideally you'd only have to ingest the changes. Now, what happens in practice is you have to go through all the APIs, find all the changes. You'd probably use some sort of change data capture model and then update the graph that way. But it becomes, the data ingestion part becomes a bit more efficient. The data grabbing part is still typically as onerous. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. It's actually like, I think it's a pretty complicated thing, but.
Right. I think the general idea makes sense to me, because I noticed like while we were doing our cartography syncs, like the first sync takes the same time as all of the other syncs, just because it like goes through all of the data again. Although it is like merging some of the new edges and stuff in. But
yeah, once we have the syncs into smaller retriable chunks, I want to see how that affects people's performance. I want to see if that makes things flexible enough so that maybe, I think the reason why we want event streaming is because getting the full picture every single time is very cumbersome. But if we made it into smaller chunks, maybe we'll end up getting what we wanted that way also. Let's reevaluate from that point.
so you would be like streaming events directly from like a cloud provider service, like from AWS, that something has like happened, or?
Yeah, like CloudTrail or something.
Okay. CloudTrail, okay, cool.
I think you would also unlock new features like for ECR scans. You could load the results as soon as the new image is scanned on push. Whereas now you have to wait for a new sync, which may happen like only once a day or twice a day.
Right.
And some AWS services already support that. Like they already send events to either SNS or SQS, and you could parse them, like load them directly, and not have to wait for next sync.
The thing I would love so much is that if an AWS API gave you the ability to specify, all like describe images from the last time. I wonder if there's a filter on that or something.
Yeah, I think they just send events to SQS, and then you have to handle them.
Yeah, because like if there was just something that wasn't coupled to an event model, if we could just simply say, give me all of the last images that have changed since yesterday, then we would get that for free, basically. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I like the discussion, all of these wish list items that we're getting little by little closer to. Does anybody else have any other topics that you want to bring up? Cool.
I had.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point this out since this is something we are kind of looking at. I do promise we will fix this contributing to open source stuff. I found this to be a really good article. Rhino Security, they create Pacu, which is the attack library for AWS. So this is something that Amazon is looking through, but it is 20 really good potential escalation techniques within AWS, and the in-depth detail on how those escalation techniques actually work. We are definitely looking into creating making sure we have all of the information to determine if these apply to any of our accounts, and then creating the analysis job to pump this out. I think if you can create that analysis job in Cartography and then link it back to this blog post and say that Cartography can automatically determine if any of these escalation techniques are going to work, then I think there's a ton of value there. You can also wait till whenever we sort this out next year, and we will push our change back that has some of these in there.
I'll make an issue on this. This is a good idea.
Yeah. Also, if you're an offensive security engineer, take a look at the list, because there's some really pretty interesting ones in there. Also follow Rhino Security. They do great stuff in AWS security.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and then turn off the recording unless anybody else has something that they'd like to share with everybody else in YouTube land in the future. All right.